Well, good morning, everybody. As you can probably see, I'm in nature. We're in the season of creation at the moment, and I'm in a beautiful setting. All around me is just beauty. It's absolutely wonderful. I'm so blessed, or we are so blessed, to live in such a beautiful area. But what about that scripture that we've just read from Matthew? What about that? Does that seem unfair to you? This doesn't seem unfair to me, living in such beauty, but then there are lots and lots of people around the whole world that don't live in such beauty. When we read that story, that parable from Matthew, it makes us think, doesn't it? It makes us wonder, what is fair? What is fair in the world? Is it fair that people can come into their work situation at the end of the day and get just as much as what the people did that started in the beginning, maybe 6 a.m. in the morning? It sounds unfair to me. But I want to just extend that a little bit and think in a broader sense about that scripture. First of all, what would you feel like if that happened to you? If you were the one that started at the beginning of the day and you had all of these things and you'd work really hard, and then suddenly somebody came in at the end of the day and got paid exactly the same, what would you feel like? Or what would you feel like, conversely, if you were the one that came in late and suddenly they wanted to pay you all of this money that the others were getting from being there in the first place? I don't know. I think it just throws things all into chaos. But perhaps people in underprivileged areas feel a little bit like this. So perhaps they feel, when they look at us, we drive cars, we live in beautiful houses, we live in a great environment, we have plenty of food to eat. What do they feel like? You know, people that drive cars, there's only 18% of people in the world that have cars. That's quite incredible when we think that a lot of the people around us actually have 2 cars even per family. They might have 1 car each for just themselves. They might have five cars, 5 people in the family, and each person has a car. Who knows? We live in houses. But you know that there are 1.6 billion people that lack adequate housing. That's an incredible number. 1.6 billion people in the world lack adequate housing. We have plenty of food. We can go to the shop, buy food, get food, eat food whenever we want. Although more than enough food is produced worldwide, more than 690 million people are starving every year. And more than 9 million die from starvation. That's pretty incredible figures, I think. What do you think of us then in the West? Well, people in the Pacific Islands, for instance, they're having difficulty at the moment. They're having storms, and with climate change, they're having devastating effects of droughts and water scarcity and flooding, especially on the coasts. And we sit here, what are we doing about it? Do we ignore them? We taking some sort of action to alleviate the problem that they're in? I don't know. You might be, and that's okay if you are. And that's good, actually, if you are. But I think it just takes every one of us to do something. We can't just expect the government to do it or some other people to do it. We need to actually think about doing some of that stuff ourselves, and what sort of action can we take? Are we going to ignore them when they tell us all of this stuff's happening? Are we going to just sit back and go, okay, yeah, well, that's happening. That's your fate, or that's your lot in life. You have to grin and bear it. I don't think that's the Christian way. I don't think so. And I think that's part of what this scripture is talking about. So what have they done? Those people in, say, for instance, the underprivileged areas that don't have cars, the ones that are starving and dying from starvation, or the people in the South Pacific who have all of this devastation upon them. What have they done to deserve this? Have they done anything? Is it their fault? I don't think so. I don't think it's their fault. Yet it's really interesting when we look at some of the scriptures, or when we interpret some of the scriptures. Some of the scriptures, for instance, people have an interpretation that they think, if you are sinful, you actually have these things happen to you. Bad things happen to sinful people, and good things happen to good people. You're blessed if you do good things. Well, I'd like to say that that's errant theology. It's bad theology, really bad theology. We need to rethink things. We need to rethink our theology. And I think that's what this parable is all about. It's about us rethinking things, rethinking how we need to do things. We need to think not only the theology, but we need to think the way that we live. We need to apply this in our lives. But there's going to be a cost. What sort of cost do you think there'll be to you if you start acting differently and start responding differently in life? What can you do? Are you willing even to pay the price or to pay the cost? It's a huge cost. It means that we've got to reduce our way of living to be able to give others a better way of living. That's the bottom line. We have to surrender some of the stuff that we've got to make it better for other people. And you can only answer that yourself. Are you willing to do that? Am I willing to do it? It's a big step. There are lots of big steps to take, and we're going to have to face these steps. And it's whether or not we can face these steps is what's going to happen for our planet. All of this, everything that we do, all of our actions have an ongoing effect for our future and the future of the planet and the future of our generations, our children, our children's children, and so on. And the planet that God created and gave to us, we were meant to respect and look after. Are we doing that? Are we respecting and looking after all of God's creation? You may be. If you are, that's fantastic. If you're not, maybe we need to rethink. And maybe if you are already, maybe there are other ways that you can do things. But the longer that we delay things, the more serious things get and the greater the cost. In the parable, that Jesus gets our attention by enmeshing economics and emotion. So what really is Jesus trying to tell us? And what can we learn from this? I think the parable is telling us that God's way of living well is not about being rewarded for skill, education, time, but it's according to need. And that's what we need to think about. It needs to be an equitable situation. We need to live into that. In our privileged Western society, we often judge those people who are unable to find a job, who have mental problems, addictions, and we sometimes feel that they're deserving of their situation. I'm not sure why we do, but somehow we feel, well, they've created it themselves, they belong there, that's what they've created. And we can't do anything to help them. But I think we can. And this can come from the idea that God blesses all people, and does not discern as to, or doesn't take preference over some people who are unable or in a difficult situation over those who aren't. We need to correct our theology. We really do. So this kingdom is apparently unfair if we are to understand this parable. So what we thought was unfair is possibly fair, and what we thought was fair is possibly unfair. When we look at the chapter 46 of Job, we begin to realize that Jesus, or the God's thoughts rather, of what is fair is different to what Job's friends thought was fair. In the beginning, Job's friends were telling him, oh, he was sinful. There must be sin in your life. There's something wrong in your life. You can't possibly be righteous and good. So what is it that is wrong in your life to create these things in your life? To have this sickness, to have all of this loss, etc., etc. But by chapter 46, it's all turned around. And God says, hey, no, that's not what's going on. That's not at all what's going on. We find that God is saying, he was sinless. And this stuff just happened. So what does that tell us? That tells us again that our theology could be wrong. We're wedded to this idea of what's in it for me. We do things to bless ourselves. But this concept is headed towards disaster. We've come to expect and believe that we're entitled to things these days, much more than our parents were, or our grandparents expected out of life. And these expectations can cause some people to feel depressed because they don't have what somebody else has got. They feel low self-esteem because they think they should have something else, whatever it might be, the newest car, the newest house, the newest whatever, a good job even for that matter. And it creates low self-esteem because they compare themselves to other people. God's saying, don't compare yourself to others. Don't compare yourself to others. That's not what this reign of God is all about. I can remember when I was young, we used to have an ice chest, and the iceman used to come occasionally, and well, probably pretty frequently, I'd imagine, because the ice had melted, I would think, in the ice chest fairly quickly. But we'd run down as kids, and we'd get these chips. The iceman would give us chips of ice, and we'd put them in our mouth, and we'd suck on them, and that was really, really cool. Literally, it was cool, but it was fun too. And now I think, well, we've all got fridges, and we all expect that we should have a fridge, and not only just a fridge, but the latest fridge, one that defrosts itself and does every other thing under the sun that you can possibly imagine. Look, I'm in there too. I'm speaking to myself here as well. We need to change our thinking. We need to change our theology. We need to just simply change for the benefit of the people in the world and the planet and the ecology and everything. Constant economic growth and greed is destroying our people and our planet. It's destroying our relationships. It's destroying everything. I'd like to say this is greed. And if the climate warms to the predicted levels, it's going to kill our ecosystems and our economy. We need to pull back from our greed and look towards true fairness and equity, and follow the suggestion of Jesus in this parable. Where do we go from here? Question's yours and mine. How do we turn things around? I think we need to really strongly look at that. And it takes a lot of courage to change. But I believe you are courageous people. The early Christians shared all their worldly goods, we read. This is radical. Can we do this? Can we do this radical sharing? I'd like to leave you with that thought.